Thank you, everybody, so much, and welcome to the first class of our Legacy Learning Series in honor of the 50th anniversary of Pardes. This is an ongoing series in which we're offering one class per month given by a longtime Pardes faculty member. Today, we have the honor of learning from Rabbi Dov Berkovits. Dov is the co-founder and former educational director of Nisiyah, teacher and founding member at Elul, founding senior faculty at the Yakar Synagogue in Jerusalem, and former research assistant to Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Zichrono Livracha. He is currently the director of Beit Av, an institute named in memory of his father, Rabbi Eliezer Berkovits, dedicated to creativity and renewal through Torah. Dov is the author of articles on Jewish environmental thought and Judaism and art, and has published several books. He is a graduate of the University of Chicago and Yeshiva University with degrees in philosophy and Jewish history. And last but not least, Rabbi Dov Berkovits is the former director and senior faculty member of the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. We're so lucky and grateful to have him here today sharing his class entitled Giving Witness to the Past to Create the Future. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dov to unmute himself. And we can begin.
Okay, really, thank you very much, Yarden. I need to add one small detail. That is, Baruch Hashem, I'm married to Tzipi, and we have 5 children and many grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, here in Israel. And I think I need to add that as well. I do want to say, I already said this to Yarden, that I might just sort of, blow this thing away and just say, let's talk about, because there are a whole bunch of names here I saw, people I know from so many years ago, but they've asked me to teach, so I think I'm going to have to teach. I really feel honored, I must say, to be the first teacher in this wonderful series, this legacy series, which marks the amazing 50th anniversary of Machon Pardes. And I really feel it's an honor to be in the series as Bichlal, and to be the first teacher is really something very special. And I hope that after the hour or so that we spend together, that you will feel that there was a good reason that you joined here, wherever you are out there in the world. In thinking about what it is I wanted to decide to teach, of course, it wasn't difficult for me to decide that I was going to teach a Mishnah. Even though, Baruch Hashem, over the years, I have managed to learn other parts of the Torah, here and there, and to be able to teach them here and there. But of course, many of you may know that this very special way of learning and teaching Mishnah, which is really not just about Mishnah, it's about understanding Halakha and the history of the Torah Shebaal Peh and the history of the Torah in the world and the Jewish people, in a very unique way, a very original way, really began at Pardes many years ago. And so it was very clear to me that I was going to choose a Mishnah. But then the question was, well, what Mishnah, from all the Mishnayot that you love, which Mishnah are you going to choose? The easiest thing to do would be to choose the first Mishnayot of Masechet Ta'anit, which really was the first Mishnayot that I taught at Pardes, something like 50 years ago. And of course, here in Israel, for those of you who are not here, amazingly, the first real rain fell in Israel last night. And so it would have been very appropriate to begin with Masechet Ta'anit. But in the end, I don't want to spend too much time on this introduction. In the end, I decided to choose, I hope it was a good choice, something that I've been teaching last year and this year. The first few Mishnayot of a Masechet that's hardly ever, and never mind taught, it's hardly ever heard about. Masechet towards the end of Seder Nezikin, it's called Seder Masechet Eduyot. Now, just a word about the title. Who knows who gave these Masechtot titles, Bichlal, along the way. But Eduyot seems to refer to a large number of Mishnayot in Masechet Eduyot, in which Chachamim of the Mishnah are in a sense reporting earlier traditional halachot or earlier traditions of halachot that they received from generations before. And it seems that is how it's usually understood. The Masechet Eduyot, for whatever reason, we'll come around to it in a minute. Masechet Eduyot is sort of a collection, very, very significant collection of testimonials of great chachamim who are reporting halachic traditions that they have from much earlier generations in an attempt to preserve those halachic traditions. In a sense, they're being witnesses, they're testifying, they're me'idim, they're testifying to these halachic traditions. I want to say right from the beginning that I don't think that that's the key meaning of the word. That is an important aspect, an important dimension to Masechet Eduyot, but I think that the word Eduyot also comes from the sense of a testimonial. That is to say, when a person comes to a beit din and testifies, in a sense, the person is also making a claim as to what I am committed to. I am committed to stating that so-and-so is true. I saw so-and-so happen. I'm coming to the beit din to report it. In reporting it, I'm not only testifying to something that happened, I'm testifying to a dimension of truth in myself. I'm just testifying to a commitment that I have that this is in fact truthful. I'm saying that it's truthful. And beyond that, by saying that it's truthful, I'm creating reality. And so in fact, in Masechet Eduyot, in my opinion, when many of the chachamim are me'idim, they're testifying, they're not just preserving halachic traditions, they're making a statement about their own belief categories as to what they think is important in the halakha. And this is why I'm saying these particular halachot and not others. And in doing so, they're making a claim about their own particular commitments to what halakha means and what it carries with it. Okay? We're going to begin. Yarden said that you all received a source sheet. And as a
Yes,
result,
it's in the chat box right now.
it's in the chat box. Does everybody know how to open your chat box? If there's a problem, I will do a share screen here. Okay? And so if anybody has a problem, please send the chat to Yarden that you have a problem. And if we see that there are too many people who have problems, I will do share screening. But we're going to begin, assuming that you have the text, and I'm going to begin with, not with the Mishnah, but with the Tosefta. Because the Tosefta is really very important in terms of the historical context of the discussion that I would like to create today, the historical context of Masechet Eduyot Bichlal. And so the Tosefta, I have it here in Hebrew. In English, those of you who can do it in Hebrew, do it in Hebrew. I'll read it in English. And the English here is underneath the Hebrew. And the English says as follows. When the sages entered the vineyard at Yavne, meaning Kerem B'Yavne, of course. When the sages entered the Kerem B'Yavne, this is what they said. And this is really very amazing. Right. See that I can see, no, if you share screen, you can only see the text. And I'm sort of just going to be in the corner on the top. When the sages entered the Kerem B'Yavne, they said, in the future, get this, in the future, there will be an hour, there will be a day, a period in history, in Jewish history, when a person will search for a matter among the word Dvar Hashem, that's the Hebrew. They'll be searching for Divrei Torah, and they will not find it. In the teaching of the scribes, meaning of the Chachamim, the Rabbanan, that is to say, rabbinic law, they will search for the words of the Torah in the Torah Shebaal Peh, and they will not find it. And they will search in the teachings, what's just happened here.
Edward Cohen, you're sharing your screen. If you can turn share screen off.
Okay, Edward, please turn it off.
But I think it would be good, Dove, if you shared their screen, because we don't have it printed in front of us. So if we look at the text on our computer, we don't see you. But if you share your screen, we'll see you and the text.
Okay, if it's, oh, there we go. If it's easiest for everybody, Dove, if you share your screen,
Here it
great.
is. Okay, I'm up there on the top. Again,
Great.
when the sages enter the Keren B'Yavneh, they said in the future there will be an hour when a person will search for words of the Torah, meaning Torah Shebichtav, will not find it. The teaching of the scribes, meaning Torah Shebaal Peh, Halakha, not the scribes, the Chachamim, and they will not find it. As the Navi said in Amos, a very, very famous pasuk, behold, days are coming, says Hashem, Num Hashem, they will seek out the word of Hashem, they will not find it. And then the Tosefta sort of explains the word of Hashem, prophecy, they will not find prophecy. The word of God, meaning the knowledge of the future time of the Mashiach, they will not find it. And the words of God, that one matter in the words of Torah is not similar to another. They won't be able to compare. They won't be able to study Torah and understand the relationship between the different words of Halakha. And so they said, let us begin from Hillel and Shammai. Okay, now I'd like to try to explain what all this means. This is really something very, very amazing. It says as follows. It says that Masechet Eduyot is a response to one of the great catastrophes, one of the great revolutions in the history of the Halakha. After the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, temple was destroyed. The Sanhedrin is in exile. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, in the famous story, goes to Vespasian and says, give me Yavne. And then the great scholars will now reconstitute the Torah. They will recreate the reality of the continuation of the Torah in this impossible historical situation, where after thousands of years of living at the temple, right, the Jewish people now have to reorganize in a completely different way. And some of these Chachamim understood that, in fact, this was the beginning of a very long exile. And they go to Keren B'Yavneh, okay, and they say, that's what the Tosefta says, not what I said. They said, let's begin again. Let's start this whole story again. Because if we don't do this, the Jewish people are going to forget the Torah. That's what they said. They're going to not be able to understand prophecy. They're not going to be able to understand anything about the story of the Yemot HaMashiach. And they're not even be able to sit down and learn a Mishnah and compare one halakha to another halakha. They won't be able to do it anymore. And so we need to start again. And so what they do is they begin from the beginning. And the beginning, it turns out, is not Moshe. It's not even Ezra. The beginning is Hillel and Shammai. Because Hillel and Shammai, we all know, are the fathers of the Constitution, right? They are not the American Constitution. They're the fathers of the Beit HaMikdash of the Mishnah. They created the Beit HaMikdash of the Mishnah. And so, in fact, the Chachamim of Keren B'Yavneh said, we're going to go back to the beginning of where this all began and make sure that it's not going to get lost. Now, that's really an amazing story. It's one of the most amazing stories in the history of the Jewish people, certainly in the history of the Halakha. And the Tosefta says it black and white. Now, what's interesting is that in the Mishnah, okay, you don't get that story up front. Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi doesn't tell you that. But it's clear as you go along in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi knows that you know what's written in the Tosefta. And he knows that what he's really doing right now, of course, Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi is about 3 or 4 generations after the Chachamim went to Yavne. And he's, in a sense, telling the story in his own mind, or in a sense, framing the revolution in the way that he wants to frame it. That's very important, because the Tosefta is different here than the Mishnah. But the Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi is framing Keren B'Yavneh for us, okay? And now we're going to take a look at the first few Mishnayot of Masechet Eduyot. It's an amazing, amazing Masechet. I just want to say one more thing. In in all the years that I've spent learning Mishnah, I've learned that the Chachamim of the Mishnah speak the language of Halakha sometimes very symbolically. Unlike the way we speak, we sort of bifurcate Halakha with Agadah, Midrash, and thought, and Kabbalah. It's two different worlds. But in the language of the Mishnah, the Halachot very often have very symbolic meaning. And I'm used to that. But the way in which Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi uses Halakha in Masechet Eduyot was, for me, an amazing step. I don't want to say forward, like I don't know what to call it. It's just an amazing way to talk about Mishnah, and you're going to have to be aware of that as we look at the first few Mishnayot of Masechet Eduyot. Okay, I'm not going to ask for a chat and questions right now. I'm going to take a look. We're going to read through, because we don't have a lot of time. We're going to read through the halachot, the first three halachot. They're not easy, but I know that everybody out there has done this so many times before, and it's not going to be difficult for you to do this. I'm going to do screen sharing again, and we're going to read through the first three Mishnayot, and I'm not going to explain anything. Okay, I'm just going to read it, and I'm just going to explain the law, the halakha. And I'm sorry for some of you who may be surprised that, this is what we're going to, after 40, 50 years, we haven't talked. This is what I'm going to invite you to talk about. Well, this is the first Mishnah of Masechet Eduyot. Shammai says, okay, this is where we are. And immediately I want to say, this is already something to think about, because I always thought that when there's an argument between Hillel and Shammai, usually, as in the Tosefta, Hillel comes before Shammai. But of course, there are many things we can say about that, but Mishnah begins with Shammai. Shammai says, for all women who begin to, excuse me if, again, this is a little too, chasuf. For all women who begin to menstruate, it suffices to reckon their impurity from the time of their discovering it. In order to determine, what's in parentheses is my addition, so it makes it understandable. In order to determine from when pure objects like food become tamei if the woman touched them. In other words, the question is like this. In the days of the Mishnah, certainly in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, but it seems even after the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there are many chachamim who ate food only when there was taho. They kept the laws of Tuman Ta'ava. And so in the home, when a woman had a period, there was a question if she touched food, whether the people who were keeping the laws of Tuman Ta'ava could eat that food. Now the question is, a woman, of course, begins to know when the period begins, but perhaps it began sometime earlier before she noticed it. And then we have a problem. What about all the food that she touched in the last day or two or three? Everything that she touched before she noticed that she was having her period. What's the status of all that food? Is all that food tamei because there's a safek, there's a question, maybe the period began earlier? Or do we say, no, it began, when she noticed it, and everything that she touched beforehand is taho. So Shammai said, all women who begin to menstruate, it suffices to reckon their impurity from the time of their discovering that they have the period, in order to determine from when pure objects like food become tamei if the women touch them. Hillel says, their impurity is reckoned backwards from the last time they examined themselves to the previous examination, even if this covers many days. Even if the previous bidika, the previous examination that the woman made on herself was 2 weeks before, according to Hillel, all the food that she touched in the last 2 weeks become tamei. And what's very strange and interesting, I say right away, is that, of course, Shammai is much more lenient. And Hillel seems to be Shammai. Hillel seems to be very, very chamor, very chumrah. If there's a safek, this is the classic Beit Shammai. If there's a safek, we paskin the chumrah, then we make it the severe decision. But in this discussion, Shammai and Hillel sort of reverse themselves. I want to go on. Okay. Again, the sages say, the Chachamim, there's a third opinion in the Mishnah. And this is really what this is all about. The sages say, the Chachamim, we don't know exactly which generation, are they in the generation of Hillel Shammai or a few generations later? They say, neither according to the opinion of this one, nor according to the opinion of that one. We don't accept either Shammai or Hillel. What we say is, they are considered impure for the last 24 hours. Okay? We can't say that when a woman noticed that she had a period, that we're 100% sure that it began then. So we say anything she does in the last 24, not like Hillel, it said from the last time she examined herself, even if that's 2 weeks earlier. We could say 24 hours, the last 24 hours, there's a question. However, they go on to say, but the past 24 hours when this lessens the period from the last examination. And for the period from the last examination, when this lessens the last 24 hours, which is to say, whatever is minimum, if she examined herself 12 hours before and she was okay, then only food from the last 12 hours, of course, is tameh, because 12 hours ago she checked herself and she didn't have a period. So the last examination, if it was less than 24 hours, will also determine the time in which up until then everything she touched was tahor. If she examined herself 2 days before, well, then we'll only use 24 hours. So we're using what is the minimum of these two possible categories, either the last time she examined herself or the last 24 hours, whatever is the least. So the Chachamim want to go even more kula than Hillel. It's not even, even from Shammai. Shammai said 24 hours. The Chachamim said 24 hours, yeah, but if she examined herself 12 hours ago, then that's good enough. And I want to ask one more. I'm sorry, we're going to look at one more thing, and then I'm going to talk about all this, believe it or not. Any woman who has a regular period, of course, it suffices to reckon her purity from her set time. That seems to be very logical. Then the Mishnah adds, if I will say it outright, if a woman has sexual relations with her husband, and they want to have sexual relations more than once, she checks herself between the 2 times she has sexual relations to make sure that she doesn't have a period. And that testing cloth that she uses to check herself can also be used to determine an examination as to when, in fact, before then, everything that if it turns out that she has a period and she sees that on the testing cloth, everything that was before then is tahor, is pure. Okay, I'm sorry to have to do this after so many years that we haven't seen each other, to begin with such a Mishnah, but I want to say a number of very important things about why Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi began here. Number one, he begins by saying, like the Tosefta said, let's begin with Hillel and Shammai. They began the story of the Torah Shebaal Peh as we understand it in the time of the Mishnah. Well, the Mishnah begins by saying, I'm going to tell you what Shammai said, I'm going to tell you what Hillel said, and then I'm going to tell you that the Chachamim don't accept either of them. The Chachamim don't accept either Shammai or Hillel. They say, I'm going to use their categories. It's not that they completely are oblivious to what they said, because they do use categories of examination and 24 hours, but they say, we're going to be even more kula, lenient than Shammai. We're going to reject those 2 opinions. Okay? And we're going to tell you a third opinion. Okay, that's one thing that I wanted to show you. In the next 2 Mishnayot, which we don't have time to see, okay, the same thing happens. Mishnah 2, there's Shammai and Hillel. And then the sages say, we don't accept Shammai, we don't accept Hillel. And they have a third opinion. And then there's a third Mishnah that has to do with challah. What's the minimum amount of dough that you need to have the mitzvah of challah? And then there's a very amazing thing that happens. I would like you all to see this. The sages say, again, neither according to the opinion of this one nor according to the opinion of that one. It's as if Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, why is he doing this? He says, like the Tosefta, if we're going to talk about this revelation, the revolution, as to how we reconstitute Torah, we have to begin with Hillel and Shammai. But the first thing I want to show you is how the Chachamim didn't accept what they said halachically. And then in the third example, the Mishnah, I hope you're still with me, says, there were two weavers, two people who work in the weaving, and they work down by the dung gate, by Shar Ashpot in Jerusalem. And they came and testified in the name of Shmaya and Avtalyon, the teachers of Hillel and Shammai. Okay, this is a case of the how much water you throw into a mikveh to make the mikveh not a valid mikveh. And these two weavers heard from Hillel and Shammai, the two leaders of drawing water render the mikveh unfit, and the sages confirmed their statement. And then the Mishnah says, and this is why we're doing this, why did they record the opinions of Shammai and Hillel for naught? If you don't accept their opinion, if you accept the opinion of the Chachamim, why do you teach it to us in the Mishnah? So Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi says to teach the following generations that a man should not persist in his opinion. For behold, the fathers of the world, that's where we began. We began with Hillel and Shammai. They're the fathers of the Torah Constitution. The fathers of the world did not persist in their opinion. It's not just that the Chachamim didn't agree with them. Hillel and Shammai themselves said the two weavers by the dung gate, who are not very great Chachamim, what they said about Shammai, Shmaya and Avtalyon, they're our teachers. Hillel and Shammai learned Torah from Shmaya and Avtalyon. No, says Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, what you have to understand about your commitment to the Halakha that you deeply believe in, right, is that you may actually be about to give up on that opinion and allow others to decide in your place. And certainly if they're Chachamim, but even if they're two weavers from the dung gate in Jerusalem. And so Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi begins his story about the history of the Halakha by saying, why do we record the opinions of Shammai and Hillel if we know that we don't accept them? To teach all following generations that someone should not persist in his opinion as if he understands. He may be convinced, he should be convinced that it's the truth of the Torah. Just because you're convinced that it's the truth of the Torah, and even if you're Shammai and Hillel, you have to listen to other people's opinion, and you have to listen to the truth that they're saying, and you have to question yourself. You have to try to understand what's being said in the other opinions, and in the end, you may be able to say to yourself, there's more to that than what I thought. And so the fathers of the world did not persist in their opinion. I want to show you something that we're all familiar with. In the Masechet Eduyot, right? We're all familiar with this. I didn't translate this, I'm sorry. Kol mahloket shi l'shem shamayim, every argument in the Torah that's l'shem shamayim will always exist for generations. She'en l'shem shamayim, but if the argument is only about ego and control and honor and power, it won't survive. What's a mahloket that's l'shem shamayim? I always thought that the Mishnah said Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. But the Mishnah says, no, it's the mahloket of Hillel and Shammai. Because the mahloket, and I want to tell you this, I counted once the number of arguments in the Mishnah between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and it's about 350. The number of arguments between Hillel and Shammai in the Mishnah doesn't get more than 10. But what Mishnah said in Masechet Avot was wait till Masechet, not wait, but take a look at Masechet Eduyot and you'll understand what I mean. What I mean is, I'm going to teach you the laws, the opinions of Hillel and Shammai, not because that's the law, but I want you to see how a mahloket that is for the purpose of understanding the truth of the Torah will survive for generations, even when we don't determine the halakha according to either of them. Neither of them is the halakha. There's a third opinion. But Hillel and Shammai said, you know what? We're going to give up our opinion and accept the two weavers who heard it from Hillel, from Shmai V'Altali. And Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi wants me to understand that's what we mean by a mahloket l'shem shamayim, that for thousands of generations they're going to be quoted, even though we never decide the halakha according to either of them. Not because of what they said, but because of what they said after what they said. We don't persist in our opinion. That's not a simple thing to say. I want to show you something else about this Mishnah. Okay, I want to say something else. In the language, okay, listen now, hold on to your seats. In the language of the Mishnah, we learned that when we read Mishnah, we have to pay very, 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 very close attention to the choice of words of Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi. Now, Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, it turns out in the Tosefta, the first Mishnah here about a woman in a period doesn't exist. It's something that Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi plunked in the first Mishnah of Eduyot. Now, if you pay attention to the word that is in the Hebrew, okay, when Hillel says, let me go back a step and say this. How do we treat the situation of a woman, a Jewish woman, who is paying attention to herself to keep the laws of Tuman Ta'ara for herself and her husband, and herself and her family, if it turns out that in the house there, they only ate in purity. And she's responsible for that. She's the only one that knows. Nobody else knows. She can tell a story if she wants to tell a story. Nobody's going to know. She's the only one, my friends, that can testify to herself. But her testimonial, her edut, in a sense, is about Torah. It's not about a tradition of halakha like the rabbis of Eduyot are testifying to traditions of halakha that they have received, who knows what. A woman is creating a reality in her home by testifying about herself. And her testimony testifies not before the Beit Din, it's not before anybody. It's before herself and before Hashem. Okay? That's the first edut. Get this. That's the first edut that Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi wants to tell us about. Well, that's very strange. You want to teach me about how Chachamim testify about the halachot that they receive from past generations, to teach me as to how the Torah Shebaal Peh is formulated and built. And the first example that you want to bring me is a woman who's testifying about herself, about her period. Why are you doing that? But it's clear that that's what Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi is doing. That he wants somehow this woman in this very unique situation to be teaching us something about what it means to testify in the world of Torah. But that's not the only thing. We don't, because we don't know. We don't know what her situation was for the last 24 hours, 48 hours. Okay, we'll go on with that. The language of the Mishnah, we would think that the word for examination that Hillel talks about, from the last examination, even if that was a couple of weeks ago, okay, their impurity is reckoned backwards from the last examination, even if this covers many days. She examined herself now, and for a long time, she didn't examine herself, and all that is now going to be tameh, because we don't know what the situation is. The last examination, examined herself 2 weeks ago. From then till now, we don't know what her situation is. The language that Hillel uses to talk about the word examination should be bidika. Livdok, that's the word the Mishnah knows how to use. The word used in a bet din, the bidikot, you check, you ask to check what the reality is. Examine yourself. But the language that Hillel uses very strangely is the word pekida. The word pekida is a very interesting word. And if this was a regular Pardes class, we would just stop here and I would say, anybody out there would like to make some kind of association as to what pekida could refer to. But we're not going to do that today because Yarden is going to tell me at 8:25 that I have to summarize. And that's Beseder Gamur. And so I'm just going to say, and I want you to know that the word pekida is going to be used again and again in Masechet Eduyot in many different contexts. It's clearly a opening the gate word. It's a word that opens the gates to a dimension of meaning that's symbolic, that will then play itself out in many different Mishnayot and Masechet Eduyot. And it's clear, at least for me, the first association is Bakod Yivkor Hashem Pakad et Sarah. Hashem says this, Hashem Pakad et Sarah. Hashem comes and makes Sarah pregnant, right? Well, that's certainly significant in this context. The other use of the word pekida, of course, is a word for salvation, for geula, for redemption. Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem. Yosef says God will. The word pakod is like it's like a someone who comes down and comes close to something to take a close look at it. But it's not from the word examine, it's from the word of care, of concern, or even of love. It has the sense of coming close to something to check it out, to do something there. But it has the sense of coming close and concern and care, watchfulness, even love. And so when Hillel uses the word, she examines herself. It's not that she's like, it's not like how should I say, truth and false. Is she having her period or not? No, she is doing something that has to do with coming close to the dimension of Torah and creating life anew, as with God and Sarah, and perhaps even somehow connecting to a redemptive category. Every time she looks and checks it, she doesn't just examine herself like a doctor. She examines herself to create a reality, a spiritual and human reality of Torah life. And so the word is pekida, not bidika. I want to tell you something about Masechet Eduyot, about redemption. The last Mishnah of Masechet Eduyot is a very famous Mishnah about Eliyahu Hanavi coming before the Mashiach. The last Mishnah, Masechet Eduyot, is about Eliyahu Hanavi coming before the Mashiach. What is he going to do? Bring peace between people. There's not going to be a mahloket anymore, because Eliyahu Hanavi is going to stop mahloket. But that's not all. There are a number of places in Masechet Eduyot where it's clear that the Mishnah is talking about the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. And so I asked myself, what is Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi trying to tell me about the history of Torah, about Keren B'Yavne, about the revolution of Halakha in the Torah after the destruction of the temple, the beginning of exile, by using the word pkida, and talking about a woman who's checking herself to see if she has a period or not. Not only that, the word that the Mishnah uses down here towards the bottom, the word that the Mishnah uses for that cloth that the woman is using to check herself between sexual relations with her husband, is the word idim. And you can't miss that if you know how to read Mishnah. To create the possibility of her living with her husband, there is something that testifies. That's the first time we actually hear the word edut said black on white. And here it's clear again that the Mishnah is using these words not just to teach me a halakha, but to teach me something symbolically about how this woman, a Jewish woman, represents something that will teach me something very basic as to what it meant for Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi going to Keren B'Yavne after the destruction of the Second Temple. And it's dafka a woman in this situation that somehow can teach me that. Believe it or not. And I would just like to suggest, and then perhaps, I really think, I would ask if anybody has any ideas. I don't know how many of you out there managed to follow through this whole thing, but we all know that the relationship between a man and a woman is the imagery of the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. And after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, when we go to Yavne, the Jewish people are testifying to Hashem about themselves. And the Jewish people are saying, by going to Keren B'Yavne, okay, we are still pure. We're still a woman that is in relationship with you. Even though the destruction of the temple, according to the Christians and the early Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls sects, and they all said, no, it's over. And in Yavne, said Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, the Jewish people said, it's not over. It's beginning again. But it doesn't begin just with Hillel and Shammai being the ultimate authorities. We all know that. It begins because we all know that Hillel and Shammai were the ultimate anvatanim. They were the ultimate in modesty, the ultimate in willing to say we're looking for the truth of the Torah. Okay, and secondly, because the Jewish people said in Keren B'Yavne, we want to continue. We're going to check ourselves to see how we are, and we're going to testify to who we are. Like a woman testifies to her husband, and a woman testifies to herself and testifies before Hashem that I can continue to build life now with my husband because I'm not tameh. And a woman who's able to say that to herself is saying something that represents what the Jewish people said about themselves in Yavne. That, in my opinion, is what Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi is trying to say. That's me pkida lepkida, from one geula, from one redemption to another. The Jewish people will live from one redemption to another. Because we, like a woman, when we look at ourselves, we don't just examine ourselves to say, are we okay? Are we not okay? How many mitzvot did we do? How many mitzvot didn't we do? How much Torah did we learn? No, we're trying to ascertain our position, our stature in the eyes of God. And we're able to say we can continue to bring life in the world. We can continue to have relations with you. We can have relations more than once. Okay, we had relations once, and then there was the destruction of the temple. Now we're going to have relations again. And we're testifying. We're testifying. That's what we mean. We testify. We're testifying about our own condition, about who we are. That's what Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi wants to say by using this amazing story of a woman who needs to testify about herself in order for her family to continue to, for herself to live with her family and her husband, in order for life to go on. Yes, that's the image that Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi wants to introduce to us in order to begin the passage of Masechet Eduyot, the amazing, amazing, amazing story of Masechet Eduyot, which will tell us in so many different ways about how to reconstitute the learning of Torah in a time of crisis, in a time of great historical crisis, perhaps after the Shoah, after all the great communities, Ashkenazi communities were destroyed, perhaps after many of the communities that came from North Africa and the Middle East to Israel were not able to continue their traditions. Perhaps in our generation as well, it's very important to study Masechet Eduyot and understand how Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi is teaching us how you rebuild Torah. Okay, I will stop here. There's one more thing. Perhaps if there is time, I will add one more thing at the end here. But I talked a lot, and I don't know how many of you managed to follow all this. I don't know who's out there. I see some very wonderful names of people that we once studied together, Ken. Okay, yes.
So we have some really lovely messages in the chat box.
How about some lovely questions too? I like lovely messages, but I even like lovely questions even more. Anybody have any questions? Any thoughts?
I'd like to ask a question. What we heard was very convincing. Is there an aspect of the conflict of interest for the woman that she is testing herself and she's an interested party, so she has an interest in saying that she is got tameh.
You have an interest in saying she's tameh? We don't know whether what should I say? I mean, this is not a workshop on marital relations, but it's always an interesting question as to only the woman knows. What does she do with it? But that's a different question. Okay, the Mishnah is using this image to really talk about. I would even say it's even more than that. At the halachot, the final opinion in the Mishnah, which is the most lenient one, clearly says that we assume that a woman has a cheskat kashrut or a cheskat tahara. The final opinion of the Chachamim that says that we're going to take the minimal category, 24 hours if she didn't examine herself, and if she examined herself, less than 24 hours. And in doing so, the Chachamim took both categories of Shammai and Hillel and made it the minimal category. And that's to say that the Chachamim are saying that a woman is b'chizkat tahara. A woman has a chazakah that she's not a period until she sees it. But in order to make a sort of a small chumrah that maybe, just beforehand, she didn't see it right away. And so they say, less than 20, up to 24 hours or the last examination, if it was less than 24 hours. So it's clear that the halachic decision of the Mishnah is that a woman has chizkat tahara, that she's tahor until proven otherwise. And that's the halakha of the Mishnah. But again, in the symbolic language of the Mishnah, which I think is what Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi is doing here, there's a very grand story about the reconstitution of the Torah after the destruction of the temple. Ken, anybody else?
I see there's a
Hey, Joe.
question from, oh,
Yeah, hi.
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to read your question out loud that you
Oh.
posted in the chat box. So go ahead.
Hi, Dove.
Who's speaking?
It's Phil Miller. It's
Phil,
been
okay, great. How are you doing?
Good. So good to be learning with you after all these years. So my question is if we had more time, do you see this sort of the teaching about redemption and sort of checking ourselves is also extending to the Mishnayot, the second and third Mishnayot, the one with Halakha and then mikveh for
Right.
sure.
There's nida, chala, and mikveh. Right.
Yeah. Those seem to be essential. Those seem to be essential symbols of the challah and mikveh also seem to be the extension of these essential symbols of
Absolutely
of redemption. So
I agree with you. I mean, we don't have time, but there's a Mishnah. Some of you may be very familiar with it. We say in Bameh Madlikin every Friday night. Those of us who are Ashkenazim here, and there the Mishnah says, about a woman who's responsible for nida, chala, and adlakat hanir, lighting a candle. And I remember when I saw these three Mishnayot here, again, the role of the woman in terms of creating the life of the home is so central. Of course, today many men, of course, bake challahs at home. Of course, we know that. But but to begin with nida and challah really reminds you, as you said, of some very basics, the basic symbols in the life of the home, and that Mishnah in second parak of Masechet Shabbat that relates it to a woman. It's clear somehow that perhaps the mikveh, I don't want to talk about it, may have something to do with the lighting of the candle. And then we have those same three Mishnah, same three categories that appear in both of these places. And that even makes stronger the idea that the building of the home is again an underlying statement of Yehudah Hanasi as to how to reconstitute Judaism after the destruction of the temple. It's also the rebuilding of the home. It's nida, chala, mikveh. Yes, I agree. But again, that's on one level. The other level, it is being used to speak about it symbolically. But thank you for making that comment. That's for sure. Yes. Ken, there were two other people who had their hand raised. Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me? Oops.
Yeah,
Echo. We get you in an echo, but okay, go for it.
Did we lose her?
Wow.
Okay,
I
until
see
she
Mel,
comes back, let's have Lani or Lani. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Go ahead.
The L is here, if I can be heard.
Yes.
So the main problem at Yavne, right? The whole question was, how can we continue after the essence of holiness has been destroyed, right? We no longer have the Beit HaMikdash, so we no longer have this path in. And this is so beautifully saying, no. There's still, your testimony is good enough. You don't need the priests, you don't need the sacrifices. You within yourself, you meaning the Jewish people, how you within yourself, the wherewithal, and I think that's just it just comes to to the essence of what the problem is. And what you said before about the Shoah is the same thing, right? How are we going to, I remember my grandmother saying, how are we going to continue? Right? All that's gone. How are we going to continue? So it's a despair that needs to be addressed after every catastrophe. I think it's very touching to me.
Tadaba. We need to finish off, right, Yarden? There's somebody else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff Kravitz. Yes, Jeff. Where are you?
Yael wanted to ask a question as well, so maybe we have time for one more, Yael, if
Okay.
you'd like to ask.
I need to tell a story at the end. I'm going to tell a story at the end, no matter what. And so give me 3 minutes at the end.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, Dov, we studied 40 years ago together, where we had the pleasure of seeing how a pasuk can change through time as it's interpreted halachically. We looked at u'b'chukoteim lo telechu. So here we have this instance again, where there's a time of crisis in the community. And coming out on the other side of that, there's an idea that it's not just the opinions that are being presented publicly by those from within that might lead us with direction, but it might be an outside opinion that's going to take us forward. So how can we continue to keep that in mind when there have been so many instances where halakha has become ossified or stuck and has not been taking into account those other sorts of opinions?
Well, that's a classic Pardes question, right? And when time has come to end the session, I always used to say, well, let's wait till Thursday when we're going to learn Masechet Halakha, and we'll talk about that. Look, my father, Zichrono Livracha, wrote a great deal about that question, of course. And I just want to say in one, let me tell a story, and then the story that I want to tell, and then respond to that question, if I may. Beseder, Yarden?
A correction. Sfaradim also say Bameh Madlikin on Friday night.
Okay, well, certain communities that I've been in, they didn't say it anyway. Okay, it depends which Sfaradim, I guess.
Sfaradim didn't say it.
Okay, what I want to tell you is, a number of years ago, it took me a few minutes to tell this amazing story. I worked in, it sort of was continuation of Pardes with, in an Israeli organization called the Kolot, which worked with Datim and Chilonim in professional areas. And we started a what's called in English a chamama. A chamama is a what? Place for new ideas. So you create new ideas. A hothouse for ideas. And the idea was that professionals would come and they would tell us what they wanted to study. I was given the privileges of studying with Chevruta with someone named Daniel Meron, who was a very high pakid in the ministry of foreign ministry in Israel. And he asked me to teach whatever it is. I won't get into all the details. We learned the Chevruta. And then one day he said, listen, I have this great idea. We're going to invite all of the ambassadors of foreign countries to the foreign ministry in Yerushalayim, and we're going to teach them about the Chagim of Tishrei so that they understand something about the culture of the land of the people that they're in. And so one of my colleagues, Baruch Brenner, and I went to the foreign ministry, and there were 36 ambassadors from foreign countries who had relations with the state of Israel, who came to study together. An amazing experience. I felt like it was from the time of Shlomo HaMelech. Nobody had ever experienced this before, that in the foreign ministry of Israel, 36 representatives of, right, there was, giant black men and small yellow men, and you should get an amazing story. I could tell, but I won't tell the whole story. Anyway, I taught the waters of Sukkot, which is sort of the universal dimension of the mitzvah of water on Sukkot, whatever. At the end, and this is what I want to tell, after 3 hours of this, It was an amazing experience. A giant conference room in the foreign ministry in Yerushalayim. At the end, we said, okay, anybody want to respond, say anything? Okay, Jeff. So I want to, anybody want to say, so my friend who I studied with said, you don't ask that question because all the ambassadors are afraid to say anything because somebody's going to tell at home what they said. But in the end, 3 people raised their hand, okay? The ambassador to South Sudan said, thank you for talking to us about water in the book of Bereshit, because in South Sudan, there is a civil war between the tribes about the water wells, and people are getting killed because there's not enough water around and everybody's fighting for the water wells. And the ambassador to Uruguay put up his hand and said, thank you for teaching us about the water, because in Uruguay, there's so much water, we don't have nobody really pays attention to the importance of water, okay? And here, Lainey, is what I want to say. The young woman from Cyprus raised her hand, an ambassador from Cyprus, raised her hand, and she said, mamash, in these words. Till today, I say it, and I have, what do you call it, down my spine. She said, I am in your country for a year now, and I see that I always see that there is a miracle happening here. And the miracle is that you are a nation that is capable of creating yourself anew again and again. Okay, this is what she said. And then she said, I always asked myself, what's the secret? How are you able to do this again and again? And then she said, now that I've sat here for 3 hours in what you have called the Beit Midrash, now I understand how you do it. You do it in the Beit Midrash. That's what she said. And you could have picked me up off the floor, right? That was what we did at Pardes. That is what we have done. That's what we try to do. And we go. That's what we're doing here this evening to a certain extent. We're sitting together and trying to understand ourselves and the Torah and the relationship between the two. And so, Lainey, even though I can identify with the fact that, especially in this generation, but it's not just in this generation, because it takes time for the Jewish people to rebuild themselves, especially after what we went through. My father's written about it. But there's such a tremendous amount of ferment and creativity, Torah ferment and creativity going on. I know in the United States as well, and certainly in Israel, so many new Batei Midrash, so many new, it's not yet reached the stage of who's going to deal with the fundamental questions of our life in Israel and in the United States today. But there's so much new creativity going on. Can't believe it. And I deeply believe in the world of the Beit Midrash, as the ambassador, this young ambassador from Cyprus said so amazingly. She just said it out like this, as if it's so simple, so clear. So anyway, I thought, Lainey, that's where I stand. Yeah, if there's a Beit Midrash, it's going to happen. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Yashkar, Dov. This is Mel.
Okay,
Guthrie.
Mel, it's great to see you. Yes, great to see you.
Great to see you. Great to see you. I loved your Torah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Beautiful.
So now about
We're going to close. Thank you so much, Rabbi Dov. Thank you, everybody, for joining again.
Please look at it.
As I said in the beginning of the call, this was our first class of the Legacy Learning Series. The next one will be on December 6th with Mish Hammer-Kasoy, who's on this call now, on cancel culture, and Alicia Ben-Abuya. So I hope you join us for that one. Stay tuned. Thank you again, Rabbi Dov, and everybody for joining.
Hope to see you here in Israel, Bezrat Hashem.
That's